The rain made the city look like a broken mirror. Neon lights bled into puddles, stretching across the asphalt in trembling ribbons. Tires hissed over wet streets, and the air carried that heavy smell of diesel, damp concrete, and fried food from a vendor stubbornly guarding his cart under a dripping tarp. Miguel kept both hands on the wheel, not out of habit, but discipline. His taxi wasn't new, but it was clean. The seat still smelled faintly of lemon polish over old leather. The heater hummed softly, fighting the chill that crept in with the rain. He'd been driving for 12 hours straight, yet his dark eyes were as alert as they'd been that morning. He'd learned long ago that a driver's job wasn't just to take people places. It was to listen, to notice, to read the road both outside and inside the car. At 11:47 p.m., the rear door opened, and a man stepped in from the downpour. Water streaked off his tailored overcoat, the kind that looked like it cost more than Miguel's yearly rent. "Good evening," the man said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone used to being obeyed. He tossed a leather briefcase onto the seat beside him. The brass latch clicked, and papers slid just enough for Miguel to glimpse bold, black letters, Project Aurora, 3,000. "Where to, senor?" Miguel asked, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "Avenida das Flores, penthouse." The man's gaze drifted to the city, blurring past the rain-streaked glass. "But first, my office downtown. We need to make a stop." Miguel nodded and eased into the stream of traffic. The man, mid-50s, sharp features, silver-threaded hair combed back with precision, pulled out his phone. His conversation was brisk, each word a perfectly measured slice. "Yes, I have the contract here. No, it will be signed tonight. Yes, the board approves tomorrow. No delays." There was tension beneath the polished tone, like steel under silk. Miguel recognized it. He'd driven men like this before, men who carried storms inside them, men who'd learned that power could be measured in the weight of paper and ink. The traffic lights reflected green across Enrique Duarte's face, giving him a strange, ghostly look. Miguel didn't yet know his name, but it suited him, someone who belonged in a corner office 40 floors above the ground. They reached the office building, all glass and steel, the lobby glowing warm against the wet dark. Enrique disappeared inside for 20 minutes, then returned with the briefcase even heavier than before. Back on the road, Miguel noticed the way Enrique's hand lingered on the case, thumb brushing the latch like it was some dangerous animal. "You know," Miguel said casually, "I've learned something about contracts in this job." Enrique glanced up. "Oh, you read them often, do you?" Miguel shrugged. "Not with my eyes." He tapped his temple. "But I hear the way people talk about them. The tone changes. Sometimes they're excited. Sometimes they sound like they're walking into a room and locking the door behind them." Enrique smirked faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "You sound like a man who's signed something he regrets." "Not me," Miguel said, eyes back on the road. "But I've seen others who did." They arrived at the penthouse building. Even from the street, the place looked like it floated above the city, glass walls reflecting lightning in the distance. Inside, the elevator doors closed on the scent of Enrique's cologne, expensive and cold. Miguel should have left then. He should have turned the meter off and gone home. But as Enrique stepped out into the apartment's blinding white light, the briefcase swung open just enough for a single page to slide free. It landed near Miguel's foot. He picked it up. The paper was thick, heavy. In the bottom corner, nearly invisible, was a municipal seal he hadn't seen in years, faintly misaligned, as if stamped in a hurry. It hit him like a punch. He knew that seal. He'd seen it in Bairro Novo 10 years ago, when the neighborhood was demolished for redevelopment. He remembered the dust, the bulldozers, the promises of new housing that never came. He remembered his brother's name on the eviction list. Enrique turned, startled to see Miguel holding the page. Their eyes locked. "This isn't my business," Miguel began, voice low. "But don't sign the 3 billion deal." For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the glass walls. Enrique's brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" "You don't see it yet," Miguel said, "but someone's cheating you. And when they're done with you, they'll erase the people in the way, just like they erased mine." Before Henrique could reply, another voice drifted in from deeper inside the penthouse. Smooth, confident, female. "Henrique? Is he here yet?" A woman stepped into view, sleek in a grey dress, her smile as precise as her makeup. She froze when she saw Miguel. And then the elevator dinged again. Someone else was coming up. The soft chime of the elevator echoed through the penthouse like the first note of an overture. Henrique's gaze shifted from Miguel to the hallway, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The woman in grey, Lucia, glided closer, her heels whispering against the marble floor. "You didn't tell me we'd have company," she said to Henrique, her voice warm but edged. Her eyes flicked to Miguel, cataloguing him the way one might assess a stranger who'd wandered past velvet ropes into a private gala. "He's just the driver," Henrique replied, though there was a pause before the word driver, as if the label didn't quite fit anymore. The elevator doors slid open. Out stepped a man in a rain-darkened suit, taller than Henrique, with hair the color of coal dust and eyes like chipped glass. His expression was one of polite indifference, but the kind that could turn to steel in an instant. "Mendes," Henrique said, his tone carefully neutral. "I didn't expect you tonight." "You should have," Mendes replied, setting a slim leather folder on the nearest table. He didn't sit. He didn't take off his coat. "We're finalizing this thing, aren't we?" Miguel, still holding the page with the faint municipal seal, felt the air shift. There was a rhythm here, an undercurrent, and he was standing right in the middle of it, without an invitation. He placed the paper back on the briefcase, but his eyes stayed on Mendes. Lucia moved to pour drinks, her every gesture smooth, rehearsed. "We're all here because we trust each other," she said lightly, though no one laughed. "And because Henrique is about to make history." Henrique didn't move toward the contract. Instead, he looked at Miguel, really looked this time, as if trying to decide whether this stranger was a nuisance or an omen. "You said someone's cheating me," Henrique said, his voice low, almost for Miguel alone. "Why?" Miguel's instincts screamed at him to walk away. This wasn't his fight, but the memory of Bairro Novo, of his brother's last phone call before the demolition crews came, was louder. "That seal on your contract," Miguel said quietly, "isn't fresh. It's recycled from a municipal clearance order. They've done this before. Same paperwork, same stamp, just enough tweaks to look clean. When the dust clears, the land's worth 10 times what they paid." "And the people who lived there?" He shook his head. "Gone." Henrique's brow furrowed. He glanced at the page, then at Mendes. "Is that true?" Mendes' lips curved faintly. "Henrique, you've been in this game long enough to know the paperwork's a formality. The returns are what matter." Lucia set a glass of amber liquid in front of Henrique. "Don't let paranoia cost you your moment," she said softly. "You know the numbers. You've seen the projections." But Miguel caught the flicker in Henrique's eyes, the smallest fracture in certainty. Mendes stepped closer, his shadow cutting across the contract. "Signed tonight, and in 48 hours, the first transfer hits your accounts. We've all worked too hard to let a taxi driver derail this." The dismissal was deliberate, sharp, but Miguel didn't flinch. "Sometimes the man behind the wheel sees more than the man at the table," he said evenly. "You watch the road long enough, you learn to spot the accidents before they happen." Henrique's fingers tapped against the glass in front of him, slow, thoughtful. For a moment, the rain outside seemed to fade, the whole penthouse holding its breath. Finally, Henrique turned to Miguel. "If what you're saying is true, prove it." The challenge hung between them like the first drop before a storm. Mendes's jaw tightened. Lucia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Miguel knew this was the point where he should have walked away, but instead, he nodded once. "Then we'll need to go for a drive." The glass elevator whispered them down 40 stories, the city swelling around them in a haze of rain and neon. Henrique stood with his hands in his coat pockets, watching his reflection more than the skyline. Miguel kept his eyes on the shifting lights below. The streets were slick ribbons, every puddle holding a warped fragment of the world above. When the doors slid open to the lobby, the security guard gave them a curious look. Two men in suits following a taxi driver at midnight wasn't an everyday sight. Mendez didn't bother hiding his irritation. His footsteps clicked with sharp precision across the marble. Out on the curb, Miguel's taxi waited like an old friend, a little worn but steady. The rain had eased into a fine mist, clinging to the yellow paint. Miguel opened the passenger door for Henrique, but Mendez hesitated. "You expect me to sit in the back of that?" Mendez asked, lips curling faintly. "You can walk if you prefer," Miguel said without looking at him. Henrique slid in beside the driver's seat. Mendez muttered something under his breath and took the back, the leather creaking under his weight. Miguel eased the taxi into the street, the wipers keeping time with his thoughts. "We're going to Bairro Novo," he said. Henrique's head turned. "That place is gone." "Exactly." They drove in silence for several minutes. The city changed block by block, the glass towers giving way to aging apartment rows, then to streets lined with shuttered shops. Neon thinned, replaced by dim sodium lamps casting everything in a sickly orange glow. Miguel's voice cut through the hum of the engine. 10 years ago, this was a neighborhood. Families, schools, a football pitch that turned into a market on Sundays. Then a development deal came through. Papers were signed. People were promised new homes. Instead, they got eviction notices. Henrique's gaze stayed forward, but his shoulders tensed. "They used a municipal clearance order," Miguel continued. "Same stamp I saw on your contract. After the demolition, the land changed hands twice before anyone noticed. By then it was luxury condos and private offices. The original owners disappeared into the margins." Henrique finally looked at him. "And your connection to all this?" Miguel took a slow breath. "My brother lived there. He believed the promises. He was gone before I could help him." For the first time, Mendez spoke up from the back. "Tragic story, but irrelevant. Cities evolve. People adapt." Miguel's hands tightened on the wheel. "It's relevant if the same people are running the same play. If they're selling you a deal that's built on lies, you're the next fool in their chain." Henrique's brow furrowed. "You think I'm being used? I think they're counting on you being too focused on the payoff to notice what's underneath." They turned onto a street where the buildings were only half standing, their skeletal frames wrapped in scaffolding. Puddles collected in the pits where foundations should be. Spray-painted murals covered broken walls, faces of people, names in looping colors, dates underneath. Miguel pulled over. "Bairro Novo," he said quietly. Henrique stepped out into the mist, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the muddy gravel. The air smelled of wet concrete and rust. He looked around at the empty shells of buildings, at the weeds forcing their way through cracked pavement. "This was supposed to be finished years ago," Miguel said, joining him. "But once the signatures dried, the promises evaporated. The money moved, and the people who brokered the deal, untouchable." Henrique's eyes landed on one mural, a boy of about 12, smiling shyly, a football under his arm. The name beneath was Gabriel Almeida. "My brother's son," Miguel said, his voice low. "They moved him 3 times in a year." He stopped smiling after the second. Henrique stood there, the rain speckling his coat, his breath just visible in the cool air. Something in his expression shifted. Not guilt, exactly, but recognition. The realization that the numbers on his contract were attached to real lives, real consequences. Mendez, still at the car, called out, "Enough sightseeing. This doesn't change the math." Henrique didn't answer. He looked at Miguel, his voice quiet but firm. "If they're cheating me, I need proof that will hold up in a boardroom, not just in the street." Miguel nodded once. "Then we'll have to dig deeper. And the people you're dealing with, they won't like that." Henrique glanced back toward the taxi. "Good. Let's see how they react." From across the street, a car engine started, headlights snapping on, aimed directly at them. The headlights burned through the mist like the eyes of something hunting. Miguel didn't need to exchange a glance with Enrique to know they were being watched, followed, maybe even tracked since leaving the penthouse. The engine's low rumble echoed between the half-constructed buildings, bouncing off steel scaffolding and empty windows. "Get in," Miguel said sharply. Enrique obeyed without argument, sliding into the front seat. Mendez lingered a second longer, scanning the dark street, then climbed into the back, slamming the door. Miguel pulled away slowly, not fast enough to look like he was fleeing, but with enough precision to let the other car's movement confirm his suspicion. Sure enough, the vehicle eased into motion a beat later, keeping 2 car lengths behind. Enrique glanced at the side mirror. "You know them?" "No," Miguel said, "but they know you." The rain returned in fine needles, misting the windshield. Streetlights blurred into streaks as the city crept back into view, but the trailing car stayed steady in their wake. "What's the play?" Mendez asked, voice taut. Miguel didn't answer immediately. He took a series of turns, left, right again, threading them through narrow back streets where puddles hid broken pavement. Each time, the headlights followed. "Thought so," Miguel muttered. Enrique leaned closer. "So what now?" "We shake them," Miguel said. "But first we make sure they know we saw them." He slowed abruptly at a 4-way stop, long enough for the other car to close the gap. For a moment, Miguel could make out the silhouettes inside, 2 men, faces obscured by the shadow of the dashboard. Then, without warning, Miguel cranked the wheel and darted down an alley barely wider than the taxi. The tires hissed over wet cobblestone. The pursuing car hesitated, then reversed out, unable to follow without scraping its sides. "That should buy us a few minutes," Miguel said, heart pounding with controlled adrenaline. Enrique exhaled, tension leaving him in a visible wave. Mendez, on the other hand, was glaring hard enough to cut glass. "You think you're clever, driver, but all you've done is make them more suspicious." Miguel kept his voice even. "If they're following us, they already suspect. Now they know we're not asleep at the wheel." They emerged onto a wider avenue, the city lights bright again. Miguel steered toward a small diner tucked between a pawn shop and a laundromat, its sign buzzing weakly in the rain. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of coffee and fried onions. A radio played softly from behind the counter. Miguel chose a booth in the far corner, the kind with a view of both the entrance and the street outside. Enrique and Mendez followed, shedding droplets onto the vinyl seats. Enrique leaned forward, his tone low. "You said you could dig deeper. What's the next step?" Miguel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded photograph, the same one that had fallen from Enrique's contract earlier. "This picture isn't just a record," he said. "It's a warning, and I know where it came from." Enrique studied it. "From who?" "A whistleblower," Miguel said. "Someone who used to work in the city's land registry. Back then she tried to stop what happened in Bairro Novo. Now she keeps track of every project with that seal." Mendez snorted. "So what? We meet her in some dark alley, and she hands us the smoking gun?" "Not exactly," Miguel said. "She won't talk to you, but she might talk to me." Enrique's jaw tightened. "Then let's go." Before Miguel could answer, the bell above the diner door chimed. 3 men entered. Raincoats, hands in pockets, eyes scanning the room with too much focus for casual customers. One of them locked eyes with Miguel, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Enrique noticed. "Friends of yours?" "Not the kind you invite for coffee," Miguel murmured. The men split up, one near the counter, one by the window, and one slowly approaching their booth. The approaching man stopped a foot from the table. "Evening," he said, his tone polite but carrying the weight of something unsaid. "Mind if we join you?" Enrique shifted in his seat. Mendez's hand slid under the table, as if searching for something. Miguel looked up at the man, his voice calm. "That depends. You here for the pie or the deal?" The man's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. The diner seemed to shrink around them. The low hum of the radio faded beneath the sharp buzz of the flickering neon outside. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, a rhythm that didn't match Miguel's heartbeat. The man standing at their table didn't sit. Instead, he rested one hand on the edge of the booth and leaned forward just enough for his voice to drop. "You've been asking the wrong questions, driver." Enrique's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" The man's gaze flicked briefly to him before returning to Miguel. "Someone making sure this city keeps moving in the right direction, which means you don't get to interfere." Miguel stayed still, studying him. "Funny, that's exactly what the demolition foreman said to my brother before the bulldozers rolled in." The man's expression didn't change, but Miguel caught the faint twitch in his jaw. "A nerve hit. You've been followed since you left the penthouse," the man continued. "We know who you've been talking to. If you keep pushing, people will get hurt. And not the kind of people who make the news." Enrique shifted, the words landing heavier than he wanted to admit. Mendez leaned back, his face unreadable, but Miguel caught the slight curl of his lip. Not fear, but irritation. "What do you want?" Enrique asked. The man straightened. "Simple. Walk away. Sign the deal. Take the money. Forget whatever stories this driver's been selling you." He turned to leave, but Miguel's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Tell your boss the seal's sloppy. Next time, maybe they'll get it straight." The man froze mid-step. He didn't turn around. Then, without another word, he walked out, his two companions following like shadows. Silence settled over the booth. Enrique stared at the table, his mind obviously turning over 100 possibilities. Mendez was the first to break it. "You see," Mendez said to Enrique, "this is what happens when you let outsiders meddle. Now they think you're doubting the plan." "Because I am," Enrique said quietly. Mendez blinked. "Excuse me?" Enrique's eyes lifted, locking on him. "If this deal's as clean as you claim, why are men following us? Why are they threatening my driver?" Mendez didn't flinch. "Because perception matters. Doubt spreads like disease." Miguel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Enrique, there's something you need to know. That whistleblower I mentioned, she's not just tracking paperwork, she's been collecting names. Yours is on the list, along with Mendez." Enrique turned sharply to Mendez. "What is he talking about?" Mendez's eyes hardened. "He's fishing. You really going to take the word of a cabbie over a partner you've known for years?" Miguel didn't blink. "Tell him where you were when Bayro Novo fell." For the first time, Mendez looked away. That was all the answer Enrique needed. "I'll meet her," Enrique said suddenly. "The whistleblower, tonight." Miguel nodded once. "She doesn't trust suits. We go alone." Mendez stood, his voice ice. "This is a mistake." Enrique didn't even look at him. "It's my mistake to make." Minutes later, they were back in the taxi, heading toward the industrial district, where the city's old warehouses leaned like tired giants. Miguel drove in silence, the weight of the choice settling over both men. They pulled up outside a rusted gate, the kind that groaned when it moved. A lone light glowed above a side door, casting long shadows across cracked pavement. Miguel killed the engine. "She's inside," he said. Enrique stepped out, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her late 40s, hair pulled back, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She scanned Miguel, then Enrique, her gaze lingering on the latter as if measuring him against a memory. "You've brought company," she said flatly. "He's the one they're trying to play," Miguel replied. "He needs to see what you've got." She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the air smelled of paper and dust. Stacks of files lined the walls, old maps pinned to corkboards, photos clipped under yellowed light. The woman handed Enrique a thin folder. "This is your deal. And here," she opened another file, "is Bayro Novo. Same seal, same signatures, same transfer patterns, and the same final beneficiary." Enrique's brow furrowed. "Who?" The woman's voice was almost a whisper. "Mendez." Enrique's hand tightened on the folder until the paper edges dug into his skin. The room felt smaller now, the air heavy with dust and revelation. He looked down at the documents again, the neat columns of numbers, the mirrored clauses, the recycled municipal seal stamped faintly off-center in both deals. "Mendez." Enrique repeated, the name tasting bitter. The woman nodded. He's been the hidden beneficiary in every clearance order like this for the past decade. Never directly, always through layered shell companies. He makes his cut before the ink dries, then vanishes from the paperwork. Miguel stepped closer. It's why he didn't flinch at Barrio Novo. He's seen it all before, from the inside. Enrique's mind raced back through every meeting, every handshake, every moment he'd trusted Mendez to guard his interests. The image of his so-called partner, leaning casually in the diner booth hours earlier, burned in his memory. The woman's tone sharpened. If you sign tomorrow, Mendez walks away with control of half your assets, and you'll be left holding the liability when the investigation starts. Because it will start. Deals this big always leak. Enrique closed the folder, his expression hardening. So what's the play? If I confront him now, he'll cover his tracks before morning. Miguel's gaze flicked to the clock on the wall. Then we don't give him the chance. They left the warehouse under the low hum of sodium lights. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and silent. Miguel's taxi rolled through the sleeping city toward Enrique's office tower. Enrique sat in silence, staring out the window as if the streets themselves might offer an answer. If we're going to stop him, he said finally, it has to be tonight, before the board meets, before Lucia and the others lock the doors. Miguel kept his eyes on the road. You'll need leverage, something they can't bury. I have something, the woman's voice came from the back seat. She had insisted on coming along. A slim flash drive now in her hand. It's every clearance order Mendez touched in the past 10 years. Names, companies, dates, enough to ruin him. Enrique glanced at Miguel. You think it's enough? Miguel's mouth curved faintly. If it's true, it's more than enough. When they reached the tower, the lobby was almost empty, just a night guard and the low whir of cleaning machines. They took the private elevator up to Enrique's office, the ride punctuated only by the soft click of the flash drive in Enrique's grip. The doors slid open to reveal Mendez. He was sitting in Enrique's chair, jacket off, tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in one hand. You're working late, Mendez said smoothly, as if he'd been expecting them. His gaze shifted to the woman. And you've brought a friend. I thought we agreed this deal was between us. Enrique stepped forward. We did. Until I found out you've been cutting me out since the beginning. Mendez's smirk was a blade. You think you're the first man to sit where you are and believe the numbers are clean. This city runs on dirt, Enrique. I just made sure you could profit from it. You made sure you could profit, Enrique shot back, slamming the folder onto the desk. Barrio Novo, Santa Elena, Villa das Aguas. All the same seal, all the same transfer, and now Project Aurora. For the first time, Mendez's smirk faltered. You've been busy. Miguel stepped into view beside Enrique, his voice low but carrying. Busy enough to know the board will see every document you've touched before sunrise. Mendez's gaze flicked to the flash drive. You think they'll believe a taxi driver and a disgraced civil clerk over me? The woman's tone cut through like ice. They won't have to believe us. They'll believe the bank transfers. They're all on here. Enrique moved toward his desk computer, plugging in the drive. Files began to spill across the screen, a decade of theft unraveling in neat digital rows. Mendez lunged, but Miguel intercepted, gripping his arm hard enough to stop him mid-stride. Enrique's voice was steady. It's over, Mendez. The office door swung open. Lucia stepped in, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. She took in the scene. Mendez frozen, Miguel holding him, the woman at the desk, Enrique with the drive, and her expression didn't break. You have no idea what you've just done, she said. Enrique met her gaze. I know exactly what I've done. And with one keystroke, the files began uploading to every board member in the company. The progress bar on Enrique's screen pulsed forward, each percentage point like the tick of a countdown. Mendez stopped struggling against Miguel's grip, his sharp, calculating mind no doubt scrambling for exits that no longer existed. Lucia stood perfectly still, her arms crossed, her face unreadable, a statue carved from ambition and ice. When the bar hit 100%, a soft chime signaled the completion. Somewhere in the city, phones were vibrating in the hands of board members. Inboxes were filling with the documents Mendez had spent a decade burying. Enrique unplugged the drive, his movements deliberate. "By sunrise," he said quietly, "your name will be worth less than the ink on these contracts." Mendez exhaled slowly, almost a laugh. "You think you've won, Enrique. This city doesn't care who steals from it. They'll just replace me with the next man willing to get his hands dirty." Enrique glanced at Miguel. "Maybe, but not tonight." Miguel released Mendez's arm, stepping back. There was no need to hold him now. The weight crushing him wasn't physical. Mendez straightened his jacket and walked toward the door, but paused just long enough to throw Lucia a look that carried both warning and betrayal. She didn't move to follow. When the door shut, silence filled the room like a slow tide. Enrique sank into his chair, staring at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets below gleaming like rivers of glass. "I thought I knew every angle," he said finally. "Turns out I didn't even know my own partner." "That's how they work," Miguel replied, leaning against the wall. "They count on you being too close to see the knife." The woman, whose name Enrique still hadn't asked, set the empty folder on the desk. "You've got a window now. Use it. And remember, what you sign shapes more than your bank account." Enrique nodded slowly. "I won't forget." She left without another word, her footsteps fading into the corridor. Miguel pushed himself off the wall. "My shift's almost over. You need a ride." Enrique looked at him for a long moment, something like gratitude in his eyes. "Yeah, but this time, no meter running." The taxi glided through the quiet streets. The storm washed away, the air cool and sharp. Enrique sat in the front seat, not speaking, just watching the city roll past. The markets closed for the night, the street vendors packing up, the first buses beginning their early routes. They stopped outside the penthouse building. Enrique opened the door, but before getting out, he turned to Miguel. "You could have walked away tonight." Miguel shrugged. "Some roads you can't ignore." Enrique's lips curved into the smallest smile. "If I'd had a partner like you from the start—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Good night, Miguel." The door shut softly, and Enrique disappeared into the lobby. Miguel drove on, the streets opening ahead of him like an unwritten page. The city was still awake in places, its secrets tucked into dark corners and whispered deals. He knew they'd always be there, but so would he. At a red light, he glanced at the empty passenger seat where Enrique had been and thought of the words he'd said at the start of the night. "Don't sign the 3 billion deal. Some warnings are just words. Others change the ending." The light turned green. Miguel pressed the accelerator and the taxi rolled forward into the glow of the city.